Year 7. I hope you're all okay. So today we're going to be doing the second lesson of the Circle of Life topic, okay? So last week we were talking about food chains and food webs. So just to start, you can see this pause symbol here. So when you see that, it means you're going to have to pause the video on this slide. So just to start, if you answer these three questions, what's the name of the plant in a food chain, the animal that eats the plant, and the third species in a food chain, you don't have to write it down, okay? So you can save all of the writing for the written task at the end. All you need to do is have a think, see if you can remember what the answer to the questions are. So if you pause the video now. Okay, so what you should have had is that the plant in the food chain is a producer, okay? It produces food. The animal that eats the plant is the primary consumer. So primary, the first, okay? Consumer is the first species to consume anything in the food chain, okay? And then the third species, so this is the one that eats the primary consumer, is the secondary consumer, okay? It's the second species to eat something in the food chain. Okay, so according to scientists, a nest of young chickadee will need to eat between 6,000 and 9,000 caterpillars by the time they leave the nest. Okay, so you can see the food chain here. You've got a leaf going into the caterpillars being eaten by the chicks, and then the chicks being eaten by a bigger bird like a sparrowhawk. So most bird species eat a wide variety of foods, but nearly all of them will eat a caterpillar at some point in their lives. So we can represent our food chain here in a slightly different way as well, okay? And that way is a pyramid of numbers. So we take the numbers of each individual, okay, species at each point in the food chain, and we plot it like a pyramid, okay? So you can see here, we start at 0, okay? So every bar must be centered on 0. So in the first example, where we've got 100 plants, we're going to have 50 plants to the left and 50 plants to the right. So if we plot that, it will look like this. Okay, so 50 here and 50 here, together they make 100. So we've then got 30 caterpillars. So we're going to plot 15 to the left and 15 to the right. Blackbirds will be 5 to the left and 5 to the right because we've got 10 blackbirds. And finally, our sparrowhawks, it will be 1 each side because there's 2 of them. Okay. So you can see this pause symbol up here. So what I want you to do is have a look at the pyramid of numbers we've got here and answer the questions. Like I said before, you don't need to write it down, save the writing for the written phase at the end. All you need to do is have a think about these answers. So if you have a look over the questions and use the graph, the pyramid to answer them, and pause the slide now. Okay, so what you should have had for the plant, if we have a look, you've got 8 to the left and 8 to the right. So if you add those two 8s together, you get 16 plants. You should have had that there were 8 slugs, 2 frogs. And if we have a look here, okay, there's only 1 hedgehog. That's because we've got half to the left and half to the right, okay? So it's not a full 1 to the left and to the right. So there's only 1 hedgehog. Why are plants called producers? Well, they're called producers because they make their own food, okay? Name the primary consumer. Well, this is the first species to consume something. So in this pyramid of numbers, that's the slug. And why are primary consumers called herbivores? Well, they're called herbivores because they eat plants, okay? They eat our producers. So when we're talking about a pyramid of numbers, it's not always going to have that typical pyramid shape where it's wider at the bottom. If we think about this example, one tree can actually supply the food to loads and loads of aphids. So aphids are those little green flies that you see. Okay, so one tree can supply the food for thousands and thousands of aphids. So in a pyramid of numbers, that is going to be represented by that first bar being really narrow because there's only one tree, and then the bar up from it being much bigger, Okay, so it's not always got that normal pyramid shape. Okay, so the pyramid number shows how many of each individual species there are. So, having a look here, one tree can support many aphids. The width of each level shows the number of organisms. So if there's only one organism, then it's going to have a really narrow bar. If there's thousands, like in the case of the aphids, the bar is going to be much wider. So we can also add up the total number of grams of each living organism in the levels. This is called biomass. So the number of grams, okay, it's the mass of something. So if we think about our tree, the tree is really heavy, okay? It's going to have a really big mass. So looking at a pyramid of biomass, this bottom bar is actually going to be much bigger, isn't it? Because it's much heavier, it's got much more mass. Okay, then you've got your aphids. So even though there's thousands of them, aphids are tiny, so their mass is going to be much smaller. Okay, you've then got your ladybirds, so again a smaller mass, and it's always got this typical pyramid shape because the mass of the producer is always going to be the biggest mass. Okay, so biomass, bio means living things, so organisms. Bio is anything living. Okay, so think about biology. Okay, it's the science of living things. And then we've got mass, the number of grams or kilograms, okay? So you can see this pause symbol again, so you're going to need to pause this. What you're going to do is you're going to match the keyword here to the answer here. So if you pause the video now. Okay, so what you should have had is that an organism is a living being, for example, a plant, an animal, or a single cell life form. A food chain is a diagram showing which organisms feed on each other. And biomass is the number of grams or kilograms of a living organism, okay? So pyramids of biomass and energy. So producers trap the sun's energy in their leaves, okay? So producers can have quite a lot of energy. They're trapping it and they're storing it. Okay, so consumers receive this energy as stored energy in carbohydrates, for example, sugar and starch. But think about why we eat. We eat because we personally need that energy, okay? So some of that energy is going to be used, okay? So for respiration, movement, reproduction, think about the things you use energy for. Well, animals are going to use it for the same things, okay? So at each stage, we're losing some of that energy that's being consumed because we're using it for ourselves, okay? So we say energy has been lost from the food chain at each level, okay? That caterpillar is moving, is respiring. It needs to use some of that energy. So that chick isn't going to get all of the energy that the caterpillar got from the tree. So there's less energy to pass on, so a small amount of biomass can be supported at each level. That's why right at the top level, there's a much lower biomass because if you compare how many insects you see to how many sort of mammals, so think about foxes and badgers, there's a lot fewer mammals than there are insects because they're higher up the food chain, okay? The biomass, there's less biomass that can be supported because there's less energy. So pyramids of biomass always have this typical pyramid shape, okay, because less biomass can be supported at each higher energy level. So if we compare the pyramids, you can see this pause symbol, so you're going to be pausing it. Again, you don't have to write anything down, okay? Save the writing for the end. Just have a think or a chat with someone else in the room if there is someone, okay? So what are the pyramids called and what do they show? So if you pause the video now. Okay, so what you should have had, looking at the one on the left to start with. So you can see there's the units of kilograms here, and it's this regular pyramid shape. So that's our pyramid of biomass, okay? And it's showing the number of grams of living organisms at each level of a food chain. Having a look at this pyramid on the right, it's a pyramid of numbers. What's it show? It shows the number of living organisms at each level of the food chain. So you can see here, we're starting off with a tree. There's much fewer trees than there would be caterpillars, okay? Because one tree can hold a lot of caterpillars. So pyramids of biomass always have that pyramid shape. They show the amount of biomass at each level, and the biomass is the number of grams of living things, okay? So it's a measurement. So pyramid of numbers, it doesn't always have this regular pyramid shape. It shows the number of living organisms at each level. One large organism can support many smaller ones, which is why this bottom bar may be much smaller. So if we have a look at this food chain, so we've got one oak tree here, okay? So in a pyramid of numbers, you'd have a really narrow bar, but the mass of that oak tree, 30 million grams, okay? So that would be huge. So that bottom bar would be massive, okay? Then that goes into our aphids. So it says here 25 million aphids in numbers, okay? So one tree can support loads and loads of aphids. So that bar is going to be huge, okay? Whereas the mass of all of those aphids, because aphids are tiny, the mass is going to be a lot smaller than that of the tree. Then we go up to our ladybirds. So the mass of the ladybirds is less than that of the aphids. The number of ladybirds is also less than that of the aphids, because I think a ladybird would eat lots of aphids. Then going into our smaller birds. So we've got 20 great tits. So the number goes down, and the mass also decreases. And then into our sparrowhawk. So we've got one sparrowhawk eating all of the smaller birds, and the sparrowhawk has a mass of 300 grams. So if we put this into the pyramids, so have a look at this bottom pyramid. So it's a pyramid of number. It shows the number of organisms at each level of the food chain. One tree can be home to lots of aphids. So remember those numbers that we were talking about. We've got one tree, but 25 million aphids, okay? And one sparrowhawk then eats lots of great tits, okay? So we've got one sparrowhawk and more great tits. So we've then got our pyramid of biomass. So remember, the biomass of our tree from that slide was 30 million grams, okay? So much, much bigger than the biomass of the aphids. So the pyramid shows the biomass at each level of the pyramid. Although there's only one tree, it's got a really, really large biomass, okay? So pause symbol again, have a read through these, decide which one's false. So if you pause the slide now. Okay, so the one you should have had as the false answer is C. A pyramid of numbers always has a typical pyramid shape. So this is incorrect, because think about it, you could have one tree supporting those millions of aphids or thousands of caterpillars, okay? In which case that pyramid of numbers isn't going to have that usual pyramid shape. So our writing phase. So we've got the pause symbol here. If you have a read through, we generally in class spend 10 or 15 minutes answering these. So you can pause it for 10 minutes, answer them, because obviously we're not in class to help you out. If you need to rewind the video to find any information to help you answer questions, you're more than welcome to rewind it back. So 10 or 15 minutes if you pause it now. Okay, fantastic. Let's go through some answers. So for working towards, a pyramid of numbers shows the number of organisms at each level of a food chain. So sketching this pyramid of numbers. So you'll have trees. The number of trees is going to be much smaller than the number of caterpillars. And then you've got birds. So the birds are feeding on the caterpillars. There are fewer birds than caterpillars. Okay, so your pyramid of numbers should look like this. For working at, a pyramid of biomass shows the number of grams or kilograms of each organism at each level of the food chain. Okay, so if we're sketching this pyramid of biomass for this food chain again, we've got 5,000 kilograms of a tree at the bottom, okay, because that one tree is going to weigh a lot. Oops, sorry. Then caterpillar have a smaller biomass than the tree, and birds have smaller biomass than all of the caterpillars, okay? So it will be this regular pyramid shape. So then it asked you to sketch the pyramids for each of these. So you can see for this one, the pyramid of numbers, it will be narrow at the bottom, many more insects than the tree. So that's going to be a wider bar, and there's going to be fewer woodpeckers than insects. Okay, so your pyramid of numbers should look like this, but your pyramid of biomass should have this regular pyramid shape. So one tree can support many insects, so the level for the tree is narrow, but the level for the insects is wide, okay? So if we have a look at this food chain, we've got grass, so there's going to be loads and loads of strands of grass, so it's going to be wider at the bottom. There's going to be much fewer rabbits eating the grass, but then, so one rabbit can support hundreds and hundreds of fleas, okay? So actually, we're going to have this type of pyramid here, where it's wide at the bottom, narrow for the number of rabbits, but our secondary consumer, okay, is actually going to go wider again, because we can have lots of fleas living off a small number of rabbits, okay? So your pyramid of numbers in this case should look like this. Pyramid of biomass should look this regular pyramid shape. And then pyramid of number and biomass for this food chain, they should both look the same, okay? Because clover, smaller, they're more numerous, okay? So there's going to be way more clover leaves than there are snails. And then finally, working beyond plus. So a pyramid of biomass always has a pyramid shape because energy is lost at each level. So energy is lost when organisms carry out respiration, when they eat, when they move, okay? So think about it, we need to eat to get energy to carry out those processes. It's going to be the same for other animals as well. So this means less biomass can be supported higher up the food chain, as there's less energy available to support those organisms. Okay, so this is going back to what I said earlier. You see many more insects than you do things like foxes and badgers, because those insects are feeding off more energy in the grass, whereas higher up it's more difficult for those animals to get enough energy. Okay, so it gets smaller the higher up you go the pyramid of biomass. Okay, so we're going to write our final sentence now. It's really important so you know at the end of today what you've learnt from this science lesson. So today I've achieved, so write the word of the grade you achieved. So if you got to working at, today you achieved explain, because you could, and make sure you're putting the reason down. What can you actually do after this lesson? Okay, put the reason down. Okay, fantastic. And then show my homework. There's a 10-question quiz for this lesson. That's how we're tracking how engaged everyone is, how people are understanding the lessons. Okay, so make sure you log on to show my homework and do that quiz after you've finished with this lesson. Okay, well done, Year 7. I'm sure you've all done brilliantly. Okay, you should be really proud of yourselves for sitting down, watching this and engaging with the lesson. So well done. And you'll be hearing from me in lesson 3. Okay, keep safe, everyone.